All right, here we are in one place, and all right. Welcome to today's Day Talks, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm making sure my translators are ready. Hello, everyone. And I'll go ahead and share the screen for a second so that we make sure everybody needs to be where they want to be. All right. So if you are here and hoping that you have some Chinese support, you can go ahead and scan this QR code for Xiaotong. Or if you need some Korean language support, I believe I do have someone on the chat on YouTube. So these are the links, and I'll send them in the chat shortly. If you are not able to type fast enough, don't worry, you'll have time to get there anytime. I just want to say thank you to my admission officer friends for joining me today. We just got off a long weekend here in America, and so this is the first thing they're doing when they wake up for the new week. So thank you for joining me. And I also want to say thank you to all of our sponsor schools, because we continue to be able to have Tuesday Talks and have such a great audience because of all of your support, because of you telling your parents and your friends, and counselors telling students, and vice versa. So again, thank you so much for doing this. And if you are here and your school's not on here and you want your school to be on here, make sure you reach out, because we're happy to welcome any school to be a sponsor school. So thank you again for joining us. And finally, we may or may not be playing Mr. View again this week. So make sure you open the windows up and make sure you have gallery view, so that at any point you might be able to see someone popping into the screen, and take a screenshot. If you email contact@initialview.com, then there will be a prize. Wonderful. Well, I know a lot of you are here because you want to talk about extracurricular activities, particularly in a time where the world has kind of changed. And so we're here to kind of talk about that. We want to answer questions. And so I want to encourage everyone, remind you that you should open your chat box if you're in Zoom, and you should also open your Q&A box. Just do it right away, because we're going to start with a chat, and we're also going to want to answer questions, want to know your questions as soon as you have them. So if you have questions, you can go ahead and type into the Q&A box, and we will hopefully be able to just fold it into the conversation. We will have time at the end for some questions as well. So, but just feel free. I know most of you on this talk have been really active on the chat and Q&A, and I appreciate that. And so just in case you're new, make sure you open those boxes right away. Fantastic. I think that's all I have for nuts and bolts. So I am going to ask my guests this morning if they could, or this evening for a lot of our audience, if they could introduce themselves. So I'm going to hand it to Jing, if you want to start.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Jing. I am an assistant director of international recruitment admissions at Brandeis University. Brandeis University locates in Boston area. We're only 20 minutes away from downtown Boston. And if you wonder, we are not a party school. I have been working with international students and parents for the past almost 10 years. So very glad, honored to have the opportunity tonight meeting with all of you. Thank you.
Wonderful. And I'll hand it off to Jen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Blask. I'm the Executive Director of International Admissions at Rochester. I've been there for 15 years. Please do not do the math on how old that makes me. So you might not know where Rochester is. We're not in quite as big of a city as Boston or Atlanta. We're in Rochester, New York. But I think we make the city feel a little larger than it is and a bit more cosmopolitan, because we have one of the highest percentages of international students of any school in the US, with 29% international students. I look forward to sharing what I know about extracurriculars with you throughout the session.
Fantastic. And Will.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this evening. I know for most of you, my name is Will Cannon. I'm with Emory University, where I'm a senior assistant dean of admission. I've been at Emory for 9 years in a professional capacity, but I was also a student years ago before that. So depending on the questions, I may be able to bring a couple different perspectives. Emory is located in Atlanta, Georgia, which is a really global city with people from around the world and companies from around the world, a lot of opportunity to engage outside the boundaries of our campus. We are both a liberal arts school and a research university, and those two concepts blend in interesting ways here. And I'd be happy to answer questions about that, but primarily about the extracurricular experience and how to present that. And so I'm looking forward to having this conversation with all of you over the course of the next hour or so.
Fantastic. And I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Gloria Cho Crawford. I'm one of the co-founders of Initial View and host of Tuesday Talks. And so a familiar face for many of you, I'm sure. And in case you don't know, Initial View is a platform that provides videos to admissions officers so that they can get to know you. If you have questions about that, hang on to the end. We have some people who can answer those questions as well. All right, well, let's go ahead and dive in. We're gonna start with a chat question. And so everybody open up your chat and we are going to look at the first chat question, which is, why do you think the application includes an extracurricular activities list? So go ahead and type in what you think one of the reasons might be that this application that has been around for a while has something called extracurriculars or EC list. All right, I see people starting to type in. Great, thank you. So, you know, I love this one because we talk about this all the time on Tuesday Talks, soft skills. Being able to showcase your soft skills and your personality and your attitude. Yeah, they're just, admissions officers are not just looking for academics, they are looking for a full spectrum, ability to get to know the applicant at a more personal level, to get to know students other than through numbers and metrics, to see what applicants care about apart from studying, to know the students' interests, involvement, passion, and personality. Good way to show our application of knowledge and consideration to the community, diversity, showing your interest and passion, well-roundedness, understand the students from a broad view and gain insight, let the university know more about you, motivations, various angles. These are great to show your interest outside the classroom, let admissions officers learn about applicants' experiences and skills. You guys are doing a great job of, I cannot keep up to show leadership and personality, critical thinking. Admission officer friends, if you see ones that I haven't read yet, go ahead and jump in, especially if they're different than the ones I've read. Yeah, a lot of diversity, talent besides academics. I love this. You guys are really engaged, and I'm loving that I can't keep up. Wonderful. And people already have questions, and I love it. So we're going to talk about that in a second. The second chat question I have is, okay, if you were an admissions officer, what do you think would be an quote unquote impressive extracurricular activity? And I think most of you know this is kind of a trick question, but go ahead and type in what you think might be impressive. Right? If you were an admissions officer, you were like, oh yeah, I think that's so impressive. All right, one that shows the candidate's leadership, teamwork, skills, dedication, and commitment. MUN, save a species from extinction, that's hilarious. Philanthropy, changing the world, scientific research, an activity that has positive influence to the whole community, creating a vaccine, an authentic activity. Yes, social responsibility, an activity that shows consistency and passion, something unorthodox, and persistence in pursuing a concern and deep insight subject associated with the intended major of the students' leadership contribution to the community. These are some great ideas. 501c3 nonprofit, startups. Honestly, an impressive extracurricular activity should show your passion for seeking your limits, leading a book club. All right. An activity which shows a person's willingness to change the neighborhood, solve COVID. Yeah, I love these. Some of these are super aspirational. Some of these are really big. And some of these are, oh, I love people talking about what authenticity, like what you actually want to do. And so that is what we're going to talk about today. You guys have already begun to think about the things that are really important. So I wanted to start with, confirming some of these chats that were already put in, but as admissions officers, why is the EC list actually important to you?
I can start.
Great, thanks.
So all of our campuses, I think I can speak for my colleagues as well, are not just places where students come to class and then go back to their apartment or their house, and that's it, right? We all have residential communities. We all have communities where students are engaging with one another. Yes, absolutely in the classroom, but also outside of the classroom in so many ways. They're living together. They're involved in different activities together. They're doing research together. They're having conversations in a dorm room at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? All of these different ways that they're engaging with one another. So one thing we're seeking to understand from looking at your extracurricular list and understanding your previous involvement is, how might you be involved in our communities? What will you bring to those conversations at 3 o'clock in the morning? What sort of clubs or organizations might you become involved with or lead or start? So it's not as simple as just finding students who are an academic match with our institution. We're also seeking students that are going to enrich the whole community, not just the academic classroom.
Great.
I'd be happy to jump in as well. And I'll first say, Gloria, that I'm glad that we had those questions at the beginning. And now we know how ambitious of a group that we have joining us today. If somebody solves COVID or, saves a species, then that's a great extracurricular activity. So I would like to just agree with what Jennifer said. And also, in addition to the comments that she made, it gives us a sense of your interests too. Part of it is how you might engage on our campus, but just like in the way that looking at your curricular choices can give us a sense of the direction you may want to go, from an academic subject perspective, your choices, and how you spend your time outside of the classroom give us a sense of, what's important to you and what your interests are. Some of that helps us to figure out how that student may engage on our campus, but it also just gives us a sense of what your passions may be. And in some cases, we may be looking for alignment with what we offer on our campuses and what you're interested in. And sometimes there can be a good fit in that way. But often what you're engaged with may actually be less important to us than are you engaged in something? Is something of interest to you? Are you passionate about something? Are you pursuing that? Potentially making an impact in that area, or at least demonstrating some type of intellectual curiosity, something like that. It doesn't have to look the same, and it won't look the same for every student, but that's another aspect of why the extracurricular page can be important to us and an important complement to the other things going on in the application.
So I know that a big question is, many of these students have had a non-traditional high school experience. I mean, our whole world has had a non-traditional experience for them just generally in life, but students specifically not being able to do things that maybe their upperclassmen friends were able to do, thinking that they were going to start something and then not being able to continue in it. A lot of sports impacted, a lot of clubs impacted. And so, so the question is like, what happens in this new world? Like, all my friends, and I've noticed some of them, when people were typing in, Model UN has looked very different, than it did a few years ago. So I guess the question is, what do we do? For some of our friends here, they're still in some type of lockdown. And so, Will, you mentioned it's not necessarily the activity, it is, but an activity. So the question is like, what does an activity look like in the post or current pandemic world?
I'll start. So it's a great question. I have 2 points I want to share. One is the pandemic or lockdown really had an impact on almost the entire world. Some may have a longer lockdown than others, but in general, all the students are in a very similar situation. Second point I want to share. So the first thing is just to, be chilled or relax. You and your peers are in a very similar situation. And the second is, think about what we are looking into these extracurricular activity is we want to know about you, the students, through this activity, rather than simply compare the activities themselves, because that is pointless if we just compare the activities. No, we want to know about you. So that's the whole point, and keep that in mind. And then even without COVID, for us, when we read the extracurricular activity, is, doing a volunteer work in African countries is not always more important or more meaningful than doing volunteer work in your neighborhood, in your local community, because not everybody could afford to simply fly to Africa doing volunteer work, regardless of COVID. So again, keep that in mind. So it's not a simply compare which activity is more advanced or play a more important role than others. It's not a simple a math question doing that way. I think that's the 2 points I would like to share.
Yeah, we've talked many times on Tuesday Talks about the quote unquote 24K gold activity. And so, I just wanted to, ask again to these 3, because we've had many admissions officers come on the talks, and, a lot of times the answers are always, it depends. But for the 3 of you, is there a list of activities that you have that are like, these are the ones that are, that are more compelling, or yeah, and vice versa, is there a list of extracurriculars where you think like, these are either not real or not, like just don't bring anything to the table?
I'd be happy to jump in here, and I'm glad that we have plenty of time to talk about this because there's so many different things to mention. I want to first begin with putting the extracurriculars in context for a second. This entire session is on the topic of extracurricular activities, but schools are looking at a lot of other factors too, right? So we're not making decisions entirely based on your activities list. That the activities list is going to be one of many factors that we're looking at, and it's important to keep that in mind, right? So the point about how the world has looked so different in the last couple of years, which has been a substantial part of the high school experience for most of the students, all of the students on this call. To Jing's point, that has been something that has been felt everywhere. We are keenly aware of that in our roles, right? So for a couple of years now, we have been adjusting the way we review files because everything in the world has had to adjust. Things have not been normal. And so we completely recognize that and keep that in mind when we're reviewing applications. We also understand that the way people have experienced the pandemic, though it has affected all of us, it has affected us differently based on where we live within the states, based on where we live around the world. There have been different restrictions on people based on by country. It has affected people at different times, right? So some students, it affected them more so maybe early in their junior year, and for somebody else it may have been later, closer to their application. So all of these things impact how a student is able to engage through extracurricular activities, and therefore how they may be able to present themselves in an application. So I guess that's just important context. In terms of, in the application itself, a few things, I guess a few things come to mind. Some things have been able to adapt, so for instance, Model U, and I think Laura gave the example, has shifted, and a lot of that is happening online now. Not everything can do that, right? So playing on a basketball team can't really go to the online space in the same way that Model UN does, right? So the whole "it depends" answer is in part because of that, right? So some things have been able to adjust and adapt, whereas others haven't. And so I think it's one thing to note here is, if there's something that you were engaged with or something that you want to continue doing in college, that there may have been a gap of a year or a year and a half or something in your history, feel free to make that known to us. You can explain to us that this is a passion of mine. I've been doing this other thing for a while because this, my, basketball or whatever it is, has been on hold. Maybe I'm interested in basketball, but I've been looking into, professional basketball statistics because I have time now without being able to play in the way that I used to. So I guess just keep us updated on what you're doing, what's of interest to you, how have you adjusted during the pandemic, what things have you just not been able to continue because of the pandemic, which we will understand because we have had to adjust and stop certain things too. And that might be a good place to start.
So in light of what you just said about kind of keeping admissions officers up to date, I know that many students and families will feel like they need to explain all of the COVID impact. And so I know that, Common App has a section for this. There's the additional info section. Is there any other suggestion on how students or counselors should be informing you? Is there ever a point where too much information, like information is too much information, kind of how to think about that?
I think remember that we've all had this shared experience. So I think those are great places to share, any of those places, right? The COVID impact area particularly. I do think we're at a point in the pandemic, though, where you don't need to say like on January 23rd, like we get these students, right? Like I saw so much of this year from the US where students were like, and then on March 13th, school was canceled. And it was like, we know, we all did it. So you don't need to make it sound like, it's like a movie, but you can give, and again, brief is good. Remember, we're reading many applications in a day. And a lot of times, many people will read by area, right? So you might read all applications from one school or one region in the same day or in a series of days. And so you kind of don't need that as repeated. Perhaps there's something really specific to your school or to your region that you want to make sure that we know, but I would focus on those things that make you distinct from, like, we know there was a worldwide lockdown for quite a while, right? So maybe just really drill down to those things that might be different about your community, about, kind of going back out of lockdown, coming out. I think what Will just shared, right? Like basketball, that's a great example that, I couldn't continue to do these activities because of what was going on. I could continue these other ones. We're really looking for people who are interested in learning. So how did you continue learning? How did that shift? How did you stop doing that one activity that you couldn't feasibly, there was no way to do it. There's no way to take it online or do it yourself in your bedroom. How did you shift to maybe learning about something else, exploring a different part of yourself? But yeah, please don't take us back to like the early days of 2020. We know what happened.
Yeah. Awesome. So based on kind of the chat, we know that a lot of these students have still been able to do things and probably a lot of things to contribute to their communities, maybe in a more online fashion, but but still a lot. And so a question here is, there's supposed to be 10, right? 10 spaces for 10 activities on your application. Let's talk about this in two ways. How should you approach the 10? In terms of order or and kind of common mistakes maybe you can talk about in that. But also, what do you do if you have more than 10? So maybe we'll start off with, how do we approach the 10? Any advice?
I think that first of all, if you have more, let me start with this. If you're looking to figure out how to identify those 10 things to include, you may begin by thinking through which 10 things did I spend most of my time on? Which of those things did I enjoy the most? Which of those things do you think you made something of an impact, on or in? Which of those things do you think is likely to continue? Like, do you want to continue that beyond high school? Those would be some questions to ask yourself in identifying those 10 things. But I'll also say, even if you were able to include more than 10 things, the more you include, the less we're probably going to be able to focus on specific things. So if you could include 20 things, in some ways that might dilute the really strong 2 or 3 things that you want us to know and be really keenly aware of when we're reviewing your file. So more is not always better. I would go through those questions that I mentioned just a moment ago to figure out which of the activities you may want to focus on. If you have more than 10, then that's great. I think most students don't, though, to be honest, and that's fine. That's great. I think that most students have 10 things that they did outside of the classroom or less in high school. It's not uncommon for a student to really dive deeply into 2 or 3 things. Okay. But if you have, and then maybe there's 3 or 4 or 5 things that they did, because they explored it. They wanted to get a sense of what that was like. They did it for a year or 2. They were interested in it for a while, but their interests changed. They evolved. They decided to spend more time on something else. We don't expect to see 10 activities that a student did all 4 years of high school or 3 years. And year round, 5 hours a week for every single one. That would start to stretch the hours in a week anyway. We understand that students are evolving and changing and growing and learning about their interests, and they're engaging in different things. So we're not expecting to see a full robust set of 10 things. It's probably going to be a few things that you're doing that you may spend more time on, and then a few other things that were of interest to you at one point and you decided to explore it for a while. I think it's a good thing that there's only 10 that you can include, and keep in mind that the more you include, the less we may actually focus on a particular set of activities.
I would like to echo Will, completely. it's just not a competition for the college application. It's not like the more the merrier. It's just not. And also, I would like to suggest do not list the activity that is very popular in your school or in your country. However, you personally you never done that or you do not like it. Do not list it because everybody else have it. Because I won't say which country, which club. I certainly the past year, the whole country, the applications include a particular club activity. Everybody has that. Just to think about it, it cannot be the case. Everybody did that. And second of all, won't be everybody enjoyed it. And the third, if everybody has it, for us to review it, meaning nobody has it because we cannot different any student from that particular activity. That is just not good for anyone, not good for yourself, not good for your peers either. So please do just, I think being genuine, being yourself, being honest is very important. I also had students listed only like some part-time jobs because in her essay, she explained her family situation needed her to do the part-time job, to taking care of the younger siblings, to support the family. She couldn't do any sports. She couldn't join the theater club, for example. She just didn't have the time, didn't have the money to do so. But does that mean she was a worse student than others who did the clubs? No, right? Because we want to read deeper about to know our student, who they are and what is their potential, what they could be by studying 4 years at our universities. Those are very important.
Yeah. I'm going to take a step back here because I'm seeing a question and we are coming from various knowledge points of the application itself. So when we talk about extracurriculars, there's obviously a section on the application that's designated for extracurricular activities. But Jing also mentioned the essay where you could kind of highlight something about an extracurricular as well. So could you all just, Jen, do you mind like clarifying a little bit of like where should the extracurricular activities sit in the application itself?
Yeah, so as a part, the most formal place they should sit is there's a portion of the application that will allow you to list each activity, up to 10 of them, to give a label to that activity and then a brief description of that activity, 150 characters or less, and an amount of time you spend on that activity. So that is the most important place to represent those activities. And that's what Will was talking about earlier in terms of deciding, and there's no right or wrong way to do it, but deciding how you want to display those, like in what order, based on maybe the number of hours you spent per activity or how important they are to you or how you plan to engage with those activities in the future. So there's no way you have to list them. There's no precise order. It's really up to you. You can then touch on them further, in your essay. Maybe you want to write your essay more specifically about one of those topics. What you should really not do in your essay is talk about all of those topics, because you will end up writing about nothing and you will end up rewriting the activity list, which we already have. So space in the application is precious and you want to use it all in a unique and different way. Some schools will also allow you to upload a resume to accompany your application. If they allow that and you would like to submit one, fantastic. Please feel free to do so. However, you should in no circumstances take that activity list section of the application and write "See resume" next to any of those 10 areas. We specifically have asked you on the application to give us those up to 10 activities and tell us about them there. The resume, the essay, anything else can be complementary, but it doesn't take the place of this section where you're going to give us up to 10. Also, I think as you've heard, as Jing shared, you don't have to fill in all 10. It's perfectly fine to have 4, 6, 5, whatever is what you authentically did and is important to you that you want to share. That's what you should put on there. More is not necessarily better.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that where it should be in your application. And I'll just add to, same thing goes with interviews. A big mistake that I see in interviews is people trying to list all of the extracurriculars that's already on the application. You only have a short amount of time in the interview. You don't need to reiterate what's already written, but maybe go deeper on one or two of the ones that are most meaningful to you. So let's talk a little bit about meaningful to you, because last week we had this great question about competitions, and this week we have a great question about research. And so I would love to kind of touch on those as activities. And so let's start with competitions. Clarifying, do awards and things go on the extracurricular list, or where do they go?
Well, there is the option in many platforms, and I believe the Common App, that allows you to put sort of awards or other things like that in a separate section. If you have room in the if the award is very relevant and very directly related to an activity, though, and you have room to include that on the activities page, then I think it can be helpful to include that there too. So, for instance, if let's go back to the basketball example, or we could do something else. But if you were all state, or you want a regional award for that particular activity, then that might be a sensible place to include that. If it was an award that you got for excellence in your social studies class, then you wouldn't really put that in the extracurricular section, right? So it depends a little bit on the nature of the award and how closely connected it may be to an activity or not. But yeah, I mean, if you did, I mean, you would probably want to let us know that was, if there was something that helped distinguish you, in some way, then definitely include that somewhere in the application, wherever it makes sense based on the nature of the award itself, I would say.
Anything to add on the awards? There's definitely an award section, right? On that, and is that meant to be only academic awards, or is that any awards?
I think there's some flexibility with how that's used. I don't know off the top of my head the exact language for that without going back to look to see if it's exclusively for academic awards, but I've certainly seen it used for things beyond the academic realm exclusively. So if you wanted to include an award that didn't fit super tightly into the idea of being academic award in the award section, I think that would be fine. I see that all the time.
I would like to add that, if you have really some national award, international award, great, put it on there. However, please do not be stressed out if you don't have it, or you look at your peers, they put on 5 awards, you only have 1, or you don't even have 1. Do not worry. I think sometimes students think, the counselors, we are like a reading machine. We just simply scan the numbers of the student's application. But in reality, we are human beings, and we have families. We have kids in our family. We even have our own children. We understand the school, and all of you are just high school students. We have realistic expectation to our high school students. We do not expect all the students we admit will be, national swimmers, right? Or they win the Olympic math internationally. There are a few of them in the entire world, but we do not expect most of our student applications are like that. So who you are, tell us who you are, is very important.
Yeah, thank you for reiterating that. I know that there's been a lot of talk recently in different forums and different places about research programs, and so I did want to kind of sit on that for a second. given that I've seen this question kind of floating around in a lot of places. And it does seem like a big trend. Students participating in some form of external research program, and then wanting to put it somewhere on their application. So I guess the first question is like, do you count that as an extracurricular? And then any other kind of thoughts you have about it? I'm curious what you might have to say, given, I mean, Jing, I really appreciate a lot of things you've been saying about like, don't do it just because everybody else is doing it. And I kind of want to sit on that for the research as well. So starting with, for research programs, do they count as extracurriculars?
I'll just briefly say that often it does. That in some cases, research can be very much a part of a curriculum at a particular school, but often research in the way we see it is outside of a student's curriculum in their high school setting. Sometimes it has nothing to do with the high school. So this is another depends answer, because it can be a part of the curriculum depending on the school and what the school offers and that sort of thing. But if it's happening at a local college, then that would be, though that is potentially academic in nature, it is outside of their high school curriculum, and it might, it won't necessarily show up on their high school transcript. So we would like to see that in the extracurricular section or somewhere, right? So we do often see research in the extracurricular section. I think that can be a sensible place to include it, especially if it's outside of, the curricular nature of their coursework in their school. And in terms of whether we like to see that or not, that really depends on the student's interest, right? So if a student is looking to pursue that, if they want to get involved in an Alzheimer's lab at Emory, or a genetics lab at Emory, or they want to do sociological research here with the faculty, then seeing that they have experience with that and seem to enjoy it, they're spending time on that, then that can be a connection that we can make. But we don't expect everyone to have research. Not every student at Emory has research. Not every student at Emory does research. So we don't expect everyone in our applicant pool or every one of our admitted students to do it, right? So in fact, we don't want to admit an entire class of students who do research, because we don't have an entire student body at Emory who does research. So it depends on if the student seems to really want to do that. I guess what I'm saying is, I would not suggest everyone on this call go and do research because you think that is going to be wise for you. I would think about if that's something that you want to do. Would that be a valuable experience for you to have? Do you think you would learn something from that? Do you think that you may want to continue that, moving forward? And if more than half of those answers to those questions are yes, then maybe try it. You go and try it out. But we aren't expecting that in our application process. And then again, to the earlier point, yes, I think it often can be an extracurricular activity, though sometimes it can be very much curricular as part of the school offering.
So I will add a little bit about Brandeis if you're interested. So if you have done any research, please do list them, include them in your extracurricular portion. Or if you haven't done any, but you have strong interest in research in your college life, please do address them in your essay or other parts in your application, because on top of merit scholarship, Brandeis offers special scholarship or fellowship to students who wants to do research in college during college time. So that's important.
Jen, do you have anything to add on the topic?
No, I mean, I think the point is, if you spend time on it, it's an extracurricular activity, right? So if you're spending time on research or on a part-time job or on service or on like any activity that is an it's extra to your curricular or school learning, then it's you can put it there. You just have to decide, what's most important to you and what's going to make you feel like you have the strongest application you can have.
Great. Okay, so there are a lot of questions about fraud. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into that a little bit. There questions about fraud with relation to plagiarism, questions about fraud with relation to like not real activities and companies that are putting together activities and competitions and things, or just buying an award. So there's some concern about that, and would like to ask admissions officers, your thoughts on that. Are you as a team able to kind of notice these things? Like, how do you, or, how much of it kind of flies under the radar? What are you concerned about on your end? What can honest students and counselors do to kind of make sure that their activities are being seen in a different light?
I'll start on this one. So I think it's first to acknowledge that on all of our campuses, I can speak for Rochester, there are students at our university that submitted fraudulent information in one way or the other. I don't have proof of this. If I did, they would not be at the University of Rochester, right? But it is naive to say that we are able to detect all of it through the admissions process. And this is not unique to international students. This comes from US students and international students alike. And so certainly there is some of it there. We, I think honestly all feel confident that it is certainly not the majority of our students, and something that we do work hard to try to find through the process. I think one thing that, comes to mind for me immediately is that in our process, if we have any concern that anything is fraudulent, whether that be an activity, a letter of recommendation, anything in the application, that student is just automatically denied admission. We have enough applicants that we don't need to take the risk. And so it's a really big risk to take without much gain possible for it. And so you want to just, we talk about this red flag, right? That like, ooh, this really looks wrong. I think an easy way to see it in extracurriculars is you add up the extracurricular activities and say, well, there aren't that many hours in a week. How could this student have possibly done all of these things? Or, this city was in lockdown for, the last year and a half. How could this student possibly have done, right? So there's some very obvious ways that we see it throughout the application. And so that, it's obvious things, but then we also talk about in our office, pink flags, that this isn't glaringly obvious that this is fraudulent in some portion of the application, but something feels wrong. Something's not lining up. And so you don't want to have any pink flags either. You want everything to just be very authentic, so that it's all green flags, where there is no concerning items throughout the application. And I think for counselors, the way that they can support their students is by, really, and I think this is really common, to have great supporting documentation, right? That, maybe a student has been really involved in one particular activity in high school, and that same thing's referenced in the counselor letter. And they talk about, the impact the student has had on that club or on the school by being a part of that organization. Or, Jing's example about the student who had to work a lot. Well, that sounds like something that might be in a counselor letter that they might say, you may have noticed she really doesn't have any, school related extracurricular activities. And that's because, she works a lot. So those sorts of ways, talking about it's those through lines, right? So Gloria mentioned the interview. Maybe you're talking about a few activities, one really in depth in your interview, and that makes it come more alive and provides more information, along with, it being on your activity list. So seeing those things throughout the application can also make us feel more confident and less concerned about fraud in the application.
Fantastic. Sorry, Will, did you want to add to that, or?
That was a really good response. I'd be happy to just maybe add a comment or two, but basically that was I think a really comprehensive response. I agree with all of that. And while it's true that we don't have investigators, going through all parts of the application and following up, on the background of every applicant, that's beyond our capacity. So there is an element of trust in this process. And, with counselors, building trust is extremely valuable to us, over time. And to the other point, for the students that Jen was referring to, we aren't just looking at, I made this point earlier, we aren't just looking at one piece of the application, right? So there are themes that come across a file. You as a student may, tell us about your extracurricular activities, but keep in mind, we're going to see 3-4 recommendations that are also telling us about who you are and your passions and your engagements. And so we're looking for some sort of alignment. It may not be, we're not looking for verbatim, this is what they did, but if things are just completely off, that might raise a pink flag, to use Jen's term. And another example is if, the essay, let's say that the personal statement is written one way, and then the supplemental essays or an email we get from that student, the English proficiency is very different. And I get that every year. That might raise another flag of concern, right? If we're getting different writing samples with very different levels of English proficiency, as another example. So there are ways that we detect these things, right? And it doesn't mean that we have proof, but when you have applicant pools that are large enough and robust and strong enough to where, to Jen's point again, you don't need to take the risk, then the student is taking a risk that it is a big risk to take for something that would have very modest probably returns in the first place, right? So obviously we're here to say, don't take that risk. To the points we've been making over and over again, be authentic, tell us what you're, just tell us who you are and what you're doing. And yes, we don't have investigative teams to follow up on all of these things. We do have ways of detecting with fraud or the things like that.
Real quickly, you mentioned things like context earlier, and there was a question, like, do you prefer activities that are in a school or outside of school? And obviously, like, some schools have a lot more opportunities than others. So could you weigh in a little bit more about context? There's another question here about, like, how are different high schools evaluated in the admissions process, and so just real quickly, can you kind of describe a little bit how context is considered, and how that kind of may allay some people's fears who are like, oh, our school doesn't have anything, so I have to go outside to find activities. Any advice, or any insight?
I'd be happy to jump in. Again, that's a really, really important point, right? So not everyone comes to the point of submitting an application with the same, we have a lot of shared experiences. We've just shared in different ways, but we've shared this pandemic, but we don't all come to the point of submitting an application with the exact same life experience, right? And part of that manifests in the ability to engage in extracurricular activities, just as it does in the ability to take different levels of rigor and, so academically. Jing referred to this with the student who needed, and this is not a student, this is many students, right? So this is, the student who may have a lot of family responsibilities at home. They may spend 30 or more hours a week on family responsibilities, or they may have a part-time job. They have to take care of others. Their school may not offer Model UN, right? So some other schools may have really robust offerings in the school, and the student is very satisfied in engaging their interest entirely in the school community. So this all gets to the point of there is no formula, because there is no formulaic high school experience, right? So students live in their own context, in their own environment, in their own surroundings. And what we're trying to do is look across an applicant pool that is quite global, and assess students, ability to be successful on our campuses, but also ability to contribute to our campuses based on how they've navigated their own context. And that is inherently different across a global applicant pool, right? So for one student, it might look like the example that Jing shared. For another student, it might look very different. And because it's not formulaic, we can't entirely quantify this process. If we did, it probably could be done by machines, right? So, but this is a human process, and it allows us to have jobs, and so there is nuance, there is context that's involved with this, and it also kind of brings up the point that a student can shine in their own environment, and that will look different in some cases than another student shining in a very different environment.
Great. Thank you so much for providing insight on that. And I know we're running really low on time, but I really would like for you all to touch quickly on like practical advice especially with the 150 characters. And so in case people don't realize that the extracurricular list, you can do up to 10 activities, but in those activities, you only have 150 characters to describe. So some practical advice on how to handle that 150.
My number one tip. So before we even get to the 150, you have to name the activity, right? Maybe your activity is really well known in your school and it's like, it's an acronym. We don't know what that means, right? So make sure you look at it. Maybe give your activity list to someone who does not know your school and say, can you read all of these? Do you understand what they are? Or who doesn't know your community as well, right? So make sure that an outsider can understand what the activities are. So just that listing portion, make sure it makes sense. Then when you get to the 150 characters, you want to use those very carefully. So don't repeat the name of the thing again, because that's going to take up space, right? You don't need to. You've already told us what that is. Think about what do we need to know that you've learned from this experience, that you've gained from this experience, that tells us about who you are as it relates to this experience. We saw all those great things in the response earlier when Gloria asked you the question about why do we want to see these, right? What are we looking to gain from them? Remember those answers when you're then writing the 150 characters. It's less about kind of the mechanics of what you did and more about what was this experience like? What did you learn from it? What will you bring forward with you? That's much more important. So that's what you want to put into that 150 characters.
Yep. Jing, did you want to say something as well?
Yeah. So my suggestion would be try to sit down and think when you are not sitting in a classroom, right? Either in person or online, what you have been doing. Just again, forget other people, just list the things you have been doing when you're not at a school. And also maybe explain why you are doing those things. And I think that would be the things, as admission counselors, we wanted to read about you, what you have been doing and why you're doing those things.
Yeah. I am amazed at how quickly this hour went by. And I know that there were a lot of questions that were not covered, but all of these individuals would love to answer more questions. They all have their own virtual visits and virtual events as well. And so please do, especially if you have a specific institutional question, please do reach out. And they'll direct to the right place or right person to be about these things. We will continue to talk about these things in the next weeks of Tuesday Talks. Next week, we're going to be talking about institutional goals and how that impacts kind of your college search process as well. I'm sure extracurriculars will continue to come up. And so we will try to cover some of these in the future as well. In the meantime, thank you again for joining us. And, I think if anybody wants to give a final takeaway, my final takeaway here is like, do the thing that you love. Do not try to do something just because you think everybody else is doing it or you need it on your college application. Do the thing that you love. That will come out. Do the thing that you love and then figure out how to tell about it. I think that's my takeaway. I don't know if anybody else wants to add a final word before we kind of say goodbye here.
I'll add, no activity is small activities. Everything matters. So tell us. On the other hand, no activities is always better than others. So I think I've seen a lot, and I'm concerned, about people kind of doing things that they don't really want to do just because everybody else is doing it. And I want to encourage people, you don't have to do that. And that you can get creative here. Like, we have to get creative. We're in a new world. And so find an activity that you just enjoy doing, that you've discovered in your time at home. No one else is going to have it because you discovered it yourself. But think about how meaningful that's been to you, and then figure out how to say it and be specific and talk about how it's impacted you and the people around you. So thank you once again to my admission officer friends for joining us this morning. And for those of you who want to hang on, I do have a colleague who will be talking a little bit about initial view. You're welcome to stay on. But otherwise, please enjoy your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you again for joining Tuesday Talks. Bye, everyone. All right, Jing and Jen and Will, thank you so much. Have a great day. Hi, Yoquin, are you here? Awesome. I'm going to just play a quick video for people as people decide if they want to stay on or off.
I think one of the wonderful things about Initial View, it is a way to add personality to your application.
As we're watching an Initial View interview, we're listening to the stories.
I can definitely tell you Initial View interview was my game changer. It changed like my whole mission.
The way that they conduct the interview, like professionals, they really explore me in a very relaxed conversation.
It allows a student to kind of hop off of the application, as it were, or we might have said in the past, hop off of the paper.
We accept Initial View because we feel that it adds to students' narratives. It helps us understand who you are. It helps you potentially articulate a little bit better what your story is.
You cannot always explain who you are and all of that interest you have in a 150-word essay. There's so much more to you. There's so much more to your application. And the only way a college could understand that and that could reach that university you're applying to is through an interview.
All right. Well, thank you for hanging on, all of those who still have questions. And this is my colleague, Yoquin. She is one of our interviewers, and she also recently was an admissions officer at Swarthmore College, and she's going to be here to answer questions. So, and maybe tell you a little bit more about Initial View. So I'm going to log off and say goodbye, but Yoquin's here. And so please enjoy this time with her. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Yoquin. Yep.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you all for staying. My name is Yo Quinn, like Laura said. I'm currently an interviewer with Initial View. So if you're here, we have the next 15 or so minutes to talk a little bit about Initial View. So if you have any questions about interviews, how Initial View does one, I'm also happy to answer questions on the admissions side of things, how admissions officers look at interviews, the role that it plays in the admissions process. Any questions you have about Initial View and interviews, feel free to continue to use the chat function or the Q&A box, and I will answer them in the order that they come in. And all right, I just see that there was a last question about activities. So yes, 100 words or fewer for each activity in your activities list. That is correct. And okay, so there's another question. How does the interview work? Okay, and I see more questions coming in. So thank you all for asking them in the chat. So how does the interview work? It is very simple in that you have an unscripted conversation with your interviewer, and Initial View then sends the recording of that interview to the colleges that you're applying to. There are hundreds and hundreds of colleges that are partners with Initial View, to whom you can send your interview videos if you're applying to them. And, it's very flexible. You get to pick a time slot that works for you, and then you're paired with an interviewer, someone like myself, who a lot of times are former admissions officers, people who have worked in international schools, who have extensive experience in international education, who will have, a 15 or so minute long conversation with you, about your interests, about things that are important to you. The idea is to really help you think about the things you want to highlight about yourself in the admissions process. And the conversation is about you. It is not a test. We're not trying to trick you with lots of hard questions. We're really setting up the questions in a way that you're, looking deeper into the things that you have done or the things that you look forward to doing in college, right? So it's a casual conversation instead of a more, question answer interview. So there's that interview portion, and then along with the video interview, there's also a 20-minute timed writing sample. So we give you a prompt, and then there's 20 minutes for you to compose a short essay or a few paragraphs, and that will be sent along with your interview video to the schools that you want to receive your Initial View video and writing sample. So that's how it works. Hopefully that's a good way to summarize everything. Obviously there are details, but that's kind of a high level view of what that Initial View interview entails. Okay. So, right. So there's a question. The interview with Initial View will be one of the materials that's submitted to admissions officers. So correct. Once you do an Initial View interview, and obviously we send you the video once it's done, and then we ask you if you're happy with it. And if you are, you can go ahead and send that to the schools that you're applying to, that you would like to receive the Initial View interview. And how it works is that for the admissions officers, they usually have a platform, a CRM. A lot of them use Slate. We used to use Slate at Swarthmore. And what happens is that then the Initial View interview becomes one of the tabs in their little review window, right? So there would be a column on the left, and then at the bottom it will say Initial View, and admissions officers will be able to click into that as they're reviewing your application. And my habit used to be that whenever I opened a file, and if there is an Initial View interview, I will go ahead and click on that. I will click play on the video, and I will just listen to the student talk with the interviewer as I'm reviewing that application, because it helps me, first of all, hear the student's voice, right? Look at them and really get like a personal interaction or personal view of the student. And then I'm also getting a lot of helpful context from the student as I'm reviewing their application. Sometimes if I have a question about the student's application, if I'm like, oh, is this student currently, going to school online? Are they, are they, have they been doing virtual learning, right? And then the student might be talking about that in the interview already, right? So it helps me answer those questions as I review the application. But yes, in short, that is how the interviews get submitted to the admissions offices and how the admissions officers will have access to them. Okay, so if we sign up for a meeting or an interview, will the college admissions officers see it? So yes, if you do an initial interview and you do decide to send that to a certain school they're applying to, yes, the admissions officers will definitely see it. And my experience is that almost all the admissions officers always say this, is that if there is an initial interview, they will 100% chance that they will click on it. They will look at it, they will watch it, they will listen to it, because it is just super helpful to our review process for all the reasons that I described just earlier. Okay, can we choose the interviewer? So unfortunately you cannot. It really depends on who's available at the time that you picked. So you do have a lot of time slots to choose from depending on your own availability. And what happens is if you choose that time slot, we then pair you with an interviewer who's available at the time. So you cannot choose the interviewer, but I can assure you that all of the interviewers are great. They have a lot of knowledge about, working with students, and specifically international students. They were former admissions officers, they were former teachers and educators in high schools across the world. So you don't have to worry about too much about who's interviewing you, right? Just know that it will be a casual conversation. It will be a conversation that is about you, about highlighting the things that make you stand out in the admissions process. So don't worry so much about the interviewer. They're just there to really guide you through that conversation, and that's about it. Okay, and where could one upload in the application? Right, how can one upload the interview? So don't worry about that. Initial View will do all those things for you. You just tell Initial View, hey, I'm happy with this interview video, and I would like these schools that I'm applying to receive this interview. So that's all you need to know. You don't have to upload that yourself. Okay, so do we need to submit any materials for the interview? So we do need some information from you when you sign up for an interview. So obviously your name, where you go to school, an email address, some contact information, just in case we're not able to get in touch with you at the time of the interview. But that's about it. Just, I would say, keep in touch with the Initial View team throughout this process of completing your interview. Sometimes they might need additional materials or information from you. We do need a photo ID when you actually do the interview with. You need to show that to your interviewer, just so we know that you are the person who signed up for this interview. But that's about it. Yeah. Okay, so a lot more questions. Okay, so can you give an example of a writing prompt? And so, good question. And I think what's fun about Initial View, both the interview part and the writing sample part, is that lots of times you don't really expect the prompt. It's something that we think would be fun to think about and write about. And a lot of times the feedback that I get from students after I interview them, honestly, is that, hey, how did the writing sample go? Did you like the prompt? Or, was it easier or harder than you thought? And they always say, it was an interesting prompt to write about, that it made them think, that it gave them an opportunity to write about something that they, don't tend to write about. So an example that I saw earlier was, if you were to give a class on a topic to your classmates at your school, what would that be, and what would the class entail, right? So it's not necessarily a prompt that is common, or one of the common app or coalition app prompts that are super general, right? It's usually something that that we think is interesting, that that is fun to write about, not super hard or something that you need to think a lot about before starting to type. But that is just one example. Okay, all right. So yes, about the recording itself, will it be a video or just audio? So it will be a video of you. So you will be centered in our template, and you can see who interviewed you on the side. So for example, if you did an interview with me, you'll see a picture of me on the side, and then over your video of you answering those questions. And if the first recording doesn't work well, can we do the interview again? So you can do the interview as many times as you would like. If you're not happy with the first recording, you can pay for additional interviews. Sometimes students do end up doing a second or sometimes even a third interview if they're not happy with the first. My recommendation is just to go with the first one, because a lot of times it always, it ends up being the best one that you do. Students tend to overthink sometimes, and they get too kind of caught up in thinking, oh, I didn't answer this question right, or, I was a little bit, I didn't do too well there, right? So don't overthink it. Authenticity is, I think, always appreciated by the admissions officers, and we understand that, a lot of times students are doing this for the very first time, and, it takes a whole set of other skills to do this well on camera, right? Like in a video format as well. So we tend to not overthink those aspects of the interview. And a lot of times the first one is the one that you're most, genuine, authentic, that you're yourself, right? But obviously if you're like, that really didn't go well, and I want to have another try, yes, you can pay for additional interviews, and you can interview for as many times as you would like. Okay, yes, if you don't like the recording, is there an extra fee? So yeah, if you don't like the interview that you had, or if you're if you'd like to do it again, there is an extra cost. You would have to pay for an additional interview to be able to record that again. Okay, all right, so where can you send the initial interview? So I'm going to just send you the list of schools that are on the Initial View website, so you can see exactly which schools accept Initial View interviews. Okay, and meanwhile, if you have other questions, feel free to continue putting them in the chat box. Okay, so okay, so do you have to answer the essay prompt, or is it an option? So the essay portion is not optional. The 20-minute timed, the timed 20-minute writing sample is required for every student who wants to do the Initial View interview. So it's part of the package. And okay, and I call it the 20-minute writing sample because, once, either before or after you do your video interview, we send you a link that will take you to your writing sample, and you will see the prompt, and then you have 20 minutes to compose a very short essay or just a few paragraphs on this topic. We do not limit how much you can write to answer the prompt, and you won't know the prompt in advance. You will you will have access to your prompt once you open up your writing sample link. So that is how the writing portion works. And they're never the same topic, right? So I have seen lots and lots of different prompts, and every time I send a writing sample link to a student, I realize that it's a totally different topic. So we get to be really creative and random with these writing sample prompts. Okay, I'm just gonna hop over Q&A, see if there are any questions there. Okay, so this is a good question, and I know we do have just another minute, so I will end with this question. So some students are bad at interviews. While the interview is optional, should I take the interview still? So that's a very good question. And honestly, what I say is I have never seen an interview or I've never watched an interview video and think, wow, I wish the student didn't do this interview, right? So, 100% of the time, I am happy a student did an interview because it always gave me helpful context about the student. It helped me learn more about them, and it made the student more, realistic, and it helped me get like a personal view of who they are. So I always recommend that a student does an interview, just because it is a way for you to really add depth and context to your application. So, and I know that, speaking on camera or being compelling on camera virtually is not everybody's strong suit, and admissions officers understand that. We know that a lot of students, this is their very first interview in their life, right? And, so we don't necessarily have expectations of how well you should be at interviewing, right? It is more about the content and what you decide to share with admissions officers. So I think it's just, it is a great opportunity for you to think about what's already in your application, add depth to those things. Or if you look at your application and think, hey, I don't think that's all, I don't think all of that is me yet, right? I want admissions officers to know additional things about myself, or I want to highlight certain things for them. So it is probably the best way to do that. There are not a ton of places in your application where admissions officers get to hear your voice, right? It is the essay, maybe some other portions of writing, but then interview is the place for that. So I do recommend that if you have the opportunity to do an interview, that you take that opportunity, because it'll always add and never, take away from your application. So we are at the 20-minute mark, unfortunately. So thank you all for being here. Just so you know, and after every Tuesday talk, there will be an opportunity like this for you to ask questions about interviews, about initial view, and the admissions view take on interviews. So I will be here again on next Tuesday. So if you have more questions, feel free to stay a little bit longer then. So thank you. Have a great rest of your day, your evening, your afternoon. Take care, everybody, and then we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.